Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. These podcasts are presented to help explore the impact of the longevity revolution in our congregations and in our community. And we invite you to visit our website, jewishsacredaging.com, as well as the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. If you'd like to send a comment or a concern to me regarding the program or suggestion, send it to me, Rabbi Address, at jewishsacredaging.com. And it is with a great deal of pleasure that we welcome to the Seekers of Meaning microphone, Dan Baratz, a founding partner of the Zenith Group, CPA. And welcome, Dan. Good to see you. And we're going to talk something about this. This is being posted the end of February. It's tax time, as you know.
I do.
As some of us try to ignore it and repress it and put it off as much as possible. But there are new laws that impact baby boomers and our families on how we're perhaps going to be dealing with taxes. And so I thank you for coming over and trying to walk us through some of these things, because as somebody who does not understand this very much at all, really need your help.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Let's get right into this, because when we were talking before, you mentioned that there's a new law that was just passed at the end of 2019 that may or is going to have significant impact on us, our generation, how we do our stuff. It's called the Secure Act.
Yes.
Is that correct? So walk me through, what is the Secure Act?
So the Secure Act, which was passed just at the end of the year and signed into law and effective December 31st, 2019. It does a number of things. Some of them are operational changes to retirement plans, making it easier to put annuities and lifetime income vehicles into those. But I think the most important piece for boomers and people either approaching or in retirement is that it made significant changes to the way that retirement accounts, and when we talk about that, we mean 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, anything with a tax-preferred element to it for retirement, how those will be handled when they are inherited by the next generation.
Okay, so this act says a person dies, they gather, probably not like in the movies. There's distribution of assets to spouses and children, and that's the change. How that is allocated, and then how it's taxed.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so walk me through then what happens.
Sure. So the first thing to realize with anything at death, right, there are generally two types of ways that assets pass. One is called probate, which is everything that goes according to what your will says. The other is by contract or designation. All retirement accounts pass by contract. So it will go to whoever you name as your beneficiaries.
In the will.
No, so that's what's interesting about retirement accounts. What you say in your will actually has no bearing on the retirement account. Okay? So and this is something actually that we talk about all the time with clients, that your beneficiary designations should be reviewed and updated on a regular basis for this reason.
So I know when we go out and do workshops around end-of-life planning and stuff like that, and we always tell people that you have to update your living will, your advance directive every 4 or 5 years, because you may change, technology changes, etc. So now you're telling me that once I write my will and I say I'm going to give so-and-so to so-and-so, that I should come back every couple of years and do the same and reevaluate that?
Well, yes, in your will,
yeah, and
also your beneficiary designations. So, and we see this actually a lot of times where people will go to lawyers and they put together this wonderful estate plan with trusts, with new wills, with all of these kinds of things. But then there are more steps that need to be carried out. So, for instance, if your retirement account, based on your estate planning, was supposed to be left to some kind of trust,
right,
and you don't change the beneficiary designation with whoever administers that account, it's not going to happen. Same thing with life insurance, right? So life insurance, it's going to go to whoever is designated as the beneficiary, not what your will says.
Wow.
So, right. So,
but you can say that, but if it says it in the will, it still goes to that person?
Only if the money is what's considered a probate asset. So the only way that something like a retirement account would pass according to the will is generally if your estate were to become the beneficiary of the retirement account.
Oh, okay.
That in most cases is an undesirable result. And it usually only happens if you never name a beneficiary on the account.
So, we should have had this class at HUC. If people have designated in their will an executor to an estate.
Yes.
Okay. And they may put that will in the safe deposit box and not access it. Suppose the person you've named as an executor passes away before you pass away. Does the court designate another successor? An executor?
Right. So that's a bit of a legal question. It may depend on, the state or county where you die. But so a lot of people will list more than one executor in their wills. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if it ultimately got down to the point where there wasn't anybody left that's named, then it would be up to the court. And I think they would generally try to probably allow, a family member or somebody, but.
So the Secure Act. So you caution people that they have to revisit their will and where everything is, and then what are the tax? Because you say also there are changes in what's taxable and for how long.
Yes. So right, and so
yes. Go ahead. Talk to me about that.
Sure. So the beneficiaries you always want to be looking at and updating. What's happened with this Secure Act, one of the main things that's really going to impact people is that under the old law, if you left your IRA, let's say to your children, okay, they would have the ability to take money out of that account over their life expectancy. Okay. Now, it's life expectancy as determined by the IRS. All right, but there's a table.
Right, there's always a table.
Right,
there's
exactly.
Analytics, even this.
Right, it's an actuarial table. Right. Okay,
but I can just under the old system, I could parcel this out over the course of my lifetime.
Right.
Now that's changed.
That has changed. Right. So a relatively young, beneficiary that was the child of, or really anybody, right? But if they were relatively young. Maybe you're looking at a 30, 40-year distribution period.
No, absolutely.
Relatively small amount. Now what they've done is they've said with a few exceptions, okay, anybody who inherits an IRA or another retirement account has to empty that account by the end of 10 years. Right? The main exceptions to this rule are spouses, okay, children under age 21.
Okay.
Although once they reach 21,
it kicks in.
Then they get 10 years from then. Okay. People that are permanently disabled or incompetent. Those are the main kind of exceptions.
So many of my colleagues, regardless of the denomination, they'll deal with a death, and there'll be a child that say who's 40. Mm-hmm. Or whatever, 35. They'll inherit the IRA, whatever it is, or whatever the vehicle is. They now have 10 years to liquidate. And when is that money taxed? As they give it out every year? Suppose I'm going to take $5,000 a year out. Mm-hmm. So is that $5,000 taxed, or is the total amount taxed at the end of the 10 years? Yeah,
so the tax is applied as the money comes out, right? And then what happens is whatever that income is gets tacked onto the rest of the beneficiary's income. So if they're making, $100,000 a year in their regular job, and let's say they now inherit $1 million IRA, okay? And there's no requirement for them to take anything out in any of the 10 years specifically, as long as it's empty by the end of the 10th year, right? But let's say they say, I'm going to break it up.
I'm going to take $20,000 out a year.
So you could do that, right? But if you took $20,000 a year out,
that's added to my $100,000.
That's added to your $100,000 income.
Okay.
But then, if we're talking about $1 million account, $20,000 a year by the end of 10 years is only going to be $200,000.
Right. I'm not good at math.
So, but then,
but I understand.
And in that last year, you would have a huge chunk that you'd have to take.
So, can I ask you? I mean, again, this is. We didn't have this class in the seminary.
Sure.
Why did they make these changes?
Why did they make these? Now you're asking me to comment on Congress's,
Well,
So, okay, why did they make these changes? I think there were several motivations.
Other than to drive CPAs crazy.
Right, depending on who voted for it and why. I think some people voted for it because they felt that it was not good for rich people, right? And it would reduce the ability for wealthier people to pass on wealth in a tax-advantaged way. I think the big reason they voted for this is because they think it's a revenue raiser. Right? They think that it is going, and it likely will generate more tax dollars for the government.
If people don't have an IRA or a 401, whatever it is, but the bulk of their estate is a pension, okay? Is that covered in the Secure Act, or is that?
No. So that generally would not be impacted by this.
Right.
Okay. So that is going to be pretty much, if you had a spousal, benefit, or some benefit that would pay to the beneficiaries maybe for a certain number of years, that should continue because that's already set.
Oh, so that's really important to know, because there are people out there and whose bulk of their estate after death is made up of a pension rather than a 401 or whatever it is, or IRA. So that's important. So the pension is not covered under the Secure Act.
Right.
That's cool. That's good. That's good to know. We also were talking. You were talking about things that baby boomers should be aware of tax-wise now that people are starting in this day and age. Well, it's the time around retirement. I mean, the classic, age 65, which is almost meaningless in this day and age, but I'm sure you're dealing with people who walk in and say, something, I'm done. We've interviewed people, professionals who say, I'm 55, I'm done. I have enough money saved up, or I'm going to do something else. Walk us through a little bit about certain things that people who are retiring before 65 or should be aware of.
Sure.
If any.
Yeah, no, there's a lot. So depending on the situation, first of all, I recommend talking to a good financial planner, certified financial planner, and trying to, and ideally even before you make that decision, to figure out what you want your life to look like and how can you accomplish that.
If you have enough money to do it.
Right. Will you be able to have the lifestyle that you want to have?
Right.
As part of that process, and there's actually some overlap with some of this Secure Act stuff that has changed the way we approach some of that planning.
Really.
So particularly for people who have large balances in retirement accounts, and if it's a priority for them to leave, that to their children, some people they say, look, I've done enough for my kids and that's their problem. But if you want to try to maximize what you're able to, leave behind, so a lot of times what happens is people that are going to retire early probably had significant incomes because they were able to accumulate enough wealth to be able to do this. And then what happens is, let's say you retire around, 60, 61, 62. So a few things happen. Your income tends to really drop, right? And especially before you start collecting Social Security, right? And for a lot of people in those positions, and you should really evaluate when to collect Social Security, right? Don't just assume you should take it as soon as possible.
Right, because I have friends who delayed up until 70.
Right.
Right.
And so if we're in a situation where we're delaying Social Security to 70. And now you don't have to start. One of the other changes under the Secure Act is that for your own required minimum distributions, they used to start at age 70 and a half. Now they start at 72. Okay. So for somebody who may have this gap, let's say between 60 and 70, with potentially very little taxable income. So there's an opportunity in there to do a few things. One is something that we call Roth conversions. And this is something I talk about a lot with clients. So the Roth IRA, if you can get money into it, is tax-free forever, including for your beneficiaries. Okay. And there's no required distributions during your or your spouse's lifetime. So there's some real potential benefits to that for the person, while they're living. It gives them a more flexible bucket of money that doesn't require paying tax on it when it comes out. Okay. Now, the trick is you got to pay the tax at the time that you move this money from your traditional IRA or 401k to the Roth.
So you can't escape paying taxes.
You cannot escape paying the taxes. That's right.
They're going to get you one way or the other.
That's right.
Okay.
So, but for a lot of people, right, if their income has dipped to a level where it's lower than it has been, lower than we think it might be in the future, and right now tax rates are as low as they've been in a long time. So there's an opportunity, right, because this is tax you're going to pay.
Right.
Somebody's going to pay. So maybe you pay it sooner, right? And that starts to reduce, the amount that will be taxable to you and to your beneficiaries down the road. And
go ahead.
Yeah, and so then even when your kids inherit that account, they'll still have to take it out over the 10 years, but it won't be taxable.
Okay. I want to ask you specifically in some of the time we have left. We have a lot of people who deal within our work in Jewish Sacred Aging and who listen to the podcast or who tap into the website who are caregivers, and this population is going to continue to grow, not only as baby boomers are in many cases still caring for a parent who the parents in their 90s, or maybe even, I just ran across this at a congregation in Florida last week, but also now our children, the Gen Xers are coming up and they haven't really realized it yet that they're going to have to step up maybe soon. How are there various laws? I've heard some, and we've talked about some. And we live. This is in New Jersey, and there's some things in New Jersey that we'll be talking about in a future podcast. What are the tax, not advantages, wrong word, but avenues or vehicles that can help protect caregivers? And are there tax credits that are available either on state levels or federal levels? Because I'm sure you must deal with people who are active, full-time, or part-time caregivers.
Sure. Yes. So there are a few. So one of the big things is what's the deduction for medical expenses. And there's a rule on medical expense deductions at the federal level that says that you are allowed to take a deduction for medical expenses you pay for yourself, your spouse, a dependent, or anybody who could be your dependent, whether they are or they aren't.
So that's the key thing, isn't it?
Yes.
So I guess the ultimate question behind this is, could you, and I'm sure it's in the code, define a dependent? So if and I know, and I'm sure you know people too, you probably have them as clients, and every colleague I know has people in their congregations. I'm taking care of, I'm 70 years old, I'm taking care of my dad who has beginning dementia. He's living with us. We have home health care workers who come in 4 or 5 days a week, which I'm paying for out of pocket because we don't have long-term care insurance. Eventually, can I claim him as a dependent?
Yes. So if you are, I mean, there are rules, right?
Yeah,
But generally speaking, if you're providing more than half of his support and he doesn't have a lot of taxable income on his own, yes, you may be able to claim him as a dependent. And what that means under the current law is under the new tax law effective 2018, they got rid of this whole idea of exemptions for dependents. But what they have is something called the other dependent credit, which is a $500 tax credit. That the difference between, so with a deduction, like when we talk about medical expenses,
Right.
if you're able to deduct those, what that means is I get to reduce the amount of income on which I pay tax.
So, but if you alluded to like this income floor or ceiling for the person who I'm taking care of. So let's suppose in that same scenario, Dad, who's living in our house and we're taking care of him, but has a pension or income that's providing him with $40,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not poverty level. Would he still qualify as a dependent, or is he earning too much money on his own through various streams of other income to qualify as a dependent for me?
Yeah, so at that, it could present a problem in that scenario. You really need to look at it, on a case-by-case basis and, figure out where, what are all of the expenses, who's providing the support, and to really evaluate everything and see if it fits the rules or not.
Does this vary from state to state, or are all these federal?
So most of what we've talked about is federal, but then there are state rules. So like one other thing that we haven't talked about yet, where state comes into play too, is something that's called the dependent care credit.
Dependent care.
Right, dependent care credit.
Okay, what is that?
And that's a credit that a lot of people are maybe familiar with when they have young children and they're in daycare or they're in day camp, they get this credit.
Okay.
But similarly, and generally it stops at age 13, under 13. Once you're bar mitzvahed, that's it. You can't, that's what they said in the tax code,
I'm sure in the tax code there's a little asterisk.
Yes.
Once you have your bar bat mitzvah, you're
right,
out of there.
That's it.
Okay.
So, but then there's an exception that says, it stops then unless you are, disabled or incapacitated. So for older people who need this type of care, they're probably going to be considered disabled, under the rules. So in that case, the idea of this credit is that expenses that you have to pay to enable you to work. That is one piece of this that has to be.
So enable for me to go out every day and do my job.
Right.
My dad is at home.
Yep.
Okay.
At home or in a adult daycare center. Right. Any of those kinds of expenses can go toward this credit, and depending on your income, you'll get a percentage of that as a credit.
So when you say depending upon my income, are there levels that trigger
Yes.
certain?
Yes.
Okay. And
So
does that vary by state to state, or is that federal?
No, this one is federal.
Oh, okay.
Most people, you can't assume anybody's situation. A lot of people end up with the 20% bracket of this. So which means you would get, essentially 20% of the expenses, but it's up to a cap of either $600 or $1,200 on the credit. But a credit, is a dollar for dollar reduction in your tax. So it's essentially a discount. It's money back in your pocket.
And this is, again, it's probably a very simplistic question, but I know there are people out there who are living this. So the little scenario we just did is a parent who's living, or I'm sure this also consider for spouse. So I'm taking care of my spouse, okay, and also a child, okay.
Yep.
So they're at home. But what happens if we have to place Dad in a facility? Because we can no longer care for him, but I'm paying out of my pocket for the assisted living, the room, extra health care. Are there credits for that to reduce my tax?
Yes.
Okay.
So many of these same things would apply. So when they're in a residential facility like that, Typically what happens is the facility at the end of the year is going to give you a letter, and it's going to say X% of what you paid us is medical.
I got you.
Right? And so that's what you use to justify your deductible.
So they'll come to you as their accountant and say, here's the letter from Shady Acres facility.
Yep.
Put this into the hopper.
Right. Exactly.
How important is for our generation, not only for our parents, but for spouses, but also for our children coming up, to talk about powers of attorney when things can go wrong? Things go wrong.
Very. And, I actually have recent personal experience with this. So powers of attorney, and they come in all different forms, right? But generally what we're talking about here is what would be called normally a general durable power of attorney. And what that means is it's giving somebody very broad general powers over your financial matters, pretty much to handle. You can restrict it,
right?
But in a lot of cases,
I had this with my mom.
You don't want to, right?
I was paying her bills and going, and a lot of my friends have done this for their elderly parents,
right? Yeah. Now, what I have found, right, and it's great to have these in place, and you generally don't want to put too many restrictions because hopefully you trust the person that you're asking to do this, but what I have found is that you can't just walk into the bank and say, here's my power of attorney, I need to withdraw money, right? What they're going to say is, well, we need to give this to our legal department, and it's going to take them 10 to 15 days to review it, and then we'll let you know. So when you have these types of documents, it's really important to get them on file and approved with the institutions that you're going to have to use them at in advance.
Right. And it's really, I imagine through your lawyer and sitting down with you, the accountant, the financial advisor, your lawyer, to really make sure everything is covered.
Yes. And so things that now this is, power of attorney is a legal document. Right. You would need a lawyer to draft it unless you're going to do it yourself. And I don't give legal advice. You'd have to talk to a lawyer. But some of the things from my standpoint that I like to make sure are in there are things like signing tax returns. Okay, because you can have a general power of attorney. If it doesn't specifically say that your agent can sign a tax return, then they can't do it. And the IRS wants to see that if you're going to do that. Other things are some of the things we talked about today. Being able to change beneficiaries on retirement accounts, being able to take distributions or make Roth conversions from retirement accounts. Because you can have a situation, a story I discovered recently personally where, was involved with, where we discovered somebody was in hospice and discovered one of their retirement accounts had no beneficiaries on it. That can be a really bad result. And beneficiaries are really easy to change as long as you're alive.
Right.
Right?
If you change them after that, you have a scoop.
Yeah, right. Somebody's going to jail or something, right? Yeah, well, right. So like with the power of attorney, right? So a couple of important things about power of attorneys and beneficiaries. One, the second the person dies, that power of attorney is no longer of effect. And same thing with beneficiary designation. So if you discover something that's not set up the way it should be, and you don't have a power of attorney on file, right, and you don't get these forms done right away, you may not have 10 days for them to look at it.
So as we run out of time for this, the one piece of advice that you would give to our generation as they sit down and start working through this is what?
Is talk to a really good planner and review your documents, and especially if you have any trusts named as a beneficiary with this new law, you absolutely have to talk to your lawyer and financial planner.
So we've been speaking with Dan Baratz, the founding partner of the Zenith Group, and on the Secure Act and a lot of things that really are absolutely essential. They're overwhelming to a lot of people, which is another reason why you just, as we've talked about before, need to seek a professional because a lot of this stuff is over. And I'm sure people walk into you and say, I never knew this, and can you help me? I filed and all this, and beware of scams, right? On the phone, or, you know, if you get a call from the IRS and you're being sued, hang up. All those scams, which are actually really growing, I think, in challenge. Dan, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. To all of you, thank you very, very much for joining us today and listening and watching today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. We welcome your comments and suggestions to me, Rabbi Address at jewishsacredaging.com. We invite you to visit the website. And when you visit the website, we appreciate and are grateful for any donations that you would make so we can continue these podcasts and the work of Jewish Sacred Aging. You can go to the website and click on the donate button. Seekers of Meaning is recorded at the studios of Lubetkin Media Companies here in beautiful Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We look forward to seeing you on our next Seekers of Meaning program. We thank our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Take care. See you next time. Shalom.